You're listening to the Cash Podcast, creating affluence, success, and happiness with your financial surgeon, Adam Koós, President and Portfolio Manager at Libertas Wealth Management Group at libertaswealth.com.
Happy Friday, everybody. Today is Friday, September 18th, and today we're going to be talking about whether or not you should buy or rent, regardless of whether you are a current homeowner or somebody who is currently renting. But before we get into that, if this is your first time listening or watching, thanks for joining us. The Cash Podcast is produced weekly, and as stated in the intro, Cash stands for creating affluence, success, and happiness. And that's our mission. My hope is for you to learn a little bit more on each and every episode so that you become more successful, wealthier, happier, and educated than you were when you first started listening today. Now, come back often, subscribe. We're both on YouTube and iTunes. In addition, you can also follow me on Twitter at Adam Koós and on Instagram at Financial Surgeon. And last but not least, we're not going to have any visuals today, but just keep in mind that all visuals, charts, and other educational resources having to do with this episode or any other episode for that matter can always be found online at our website at libertaswealth.com. So let's go ahead and get started here. Lots of tough decisions. I've been hearing a lot these days. People asking questions about, I own a home, should I buy a new one? Or I currently rent, should I buy a home today considering what the market's doing? Or people just recently spoke to one of our favorite clients and they said, hey, I'm looking to buy a home or rent. I'm not sure what to do, but I don't know if I'm going to be there for very long. So all these things come into play when we make these decisions. And I'm always like to start with a quote. So the quote goes like this: if you don't like where you are, move. You're not a tree. And I think that goes for not only real estate and whether you should buy or sell a home, but I think it also goes pretty well with a lot of other things in life. If you don't like where you are at work, you're not a tree, so you should move. If you don't like where you are in life, you should probably move. You have the control to make decisions for yourself, and the same goes for real estate. But let's get into the meat of the conversation here. So I currently rent. So should I buy a home today? Rates are near historic lows, obviously, but the real estate market's booming. So obviously, one of the reasons the real estate market is booming right now is because rates are low. Another reason it's booming is because a lot of people are moving to find more space because they want to have places in their homes where they can work from home, because a lot of people are potentially permanently going to be working from home going forward, considering all that's happened. Another reason is there's a lot of people moving out of the cities, out of apartments, condos, because they're trying to get away from other people, not because they're antisocial, but because they're trying to be safe and they don't want to, be mixing air with other people in confined areas when you consider the fact that we've got this pandemic going on. And then there's also a lot of refinancing going on right now, but that doesn't have anything to do with buying or selling a home. It just goes to say that, there's a lot of action going on in the real estate market right now. So, if you're a renter right now, the big question is, should I rent something else or should I take advantage of these low interest rates and buy something because I'm worried that rates might go up? In my opinion, the real estate market is I don't want to say it can't keep going up, because I think it could, but I think the market's pretty hot right now. There's a lot of buyers out there. Homes are turning over very quickly, and I think it's extremely difficult, especially depending on where you're trying to buy a home and find something that you can, get your claws into before somebody else snatches it out from underneath you. And of course, if you're buying something in an area where maybe the supply and demand equation isn't so favorable to the seller, then you got to ask yourself, okay, if I'm buying, I better be able to turn around and sell this thing someday if I plan on selling it in the distant, well, not too distant future, I should say. So you can't just turn around, go buying homes in undesirable areas, hoping you can turn around and sell it, in 2-3 years from now. So I think that if the verdict here is if you rent and you're thinking about buying, I think that it might make sense to wait. When you've got interest rates at the current rates where they are right now, where you can get a mortgage, say, for 3% on a 30-year mortgage, that's wonderful, but I don't think you should worry too much about rates going up to 4.5%, 5%, 6% here in the next year. I think people worry too much about rates moving quickly, and unlike the stock market, interest rates move much slower. So I think it's even entirely possible we could see lower rates a year from now. I know that sounds crazy, but it's possible. But if rates do go up, I don't think they're going to go screaming northward in the next few months or anything like that. So I don't think that there should be a sense of urgency from the standpoint of rates. That being said, the real estate market is booming, and as a result of that, you're probably going to pay higher prices. So unless you're in a hurry and you need the space, so unless you have a growing family, unless you have the need to have more space to work from home, and you cannot find anything to rent that suits your needs, waiting might make sense. But if you do have a growing family, if you do have the need for more space to work from home, and you can't find anything to rent that suits your needs, then maybe it makes sense to find something to buy. Just keep in mind that it's a fast-moving market, and that you're really going to have your needs and wants written down on a T-chart, and make sure your realtor understands what those are so you can snatch whatever it is that's on the market quickly, and understand you might even have to pay above market price for it. So just keep that in mind as well. Moving on, what if I'm a homeowner? So if I currently own a home today, should I buy another home if I want to move or need to move, or should I rent? And I think that might sound like a silly question, but there are circumstances where it might make sense to rent. But for most, probably makes more sense just to buy another home versus renting. But again, I want to reiterate, there are situations when it might make sense to rent a home instead of buying if you currently own a home. So let's just say, for instance, if I have an apartment, if I have a home that I own right now and I've owned it for years, chances are, especially because the real estate market's done so well, I probably have equity in that home, and therefore I can probably turn around and sell that home for a profit. If it's my primary home, that profit is going to be tax-free in most circumstances, because when you sell your home and you make a profit on it, you don't have to pay capital gains tax on the profit. You get to keep that money tax-free. I won't get into the details of when it's not tax-free and all that fun stuff, but just understand that in many circumstances, it is that money when you sell it is tax-free. You don't have to roll it into a new property. That's usually when you bought and sold a lot of houses over the years, and you haven't done what's called a 1031 exchange into new properties. If you're an investor, real estate investor, and we're talking rental properties, that's a completely different story here. But let's just say you own a home and you're looking to move. The questions you have to ask yourself is, am I going to be moving again soon in the future? So how long are you going to live in this new home? If you're going to move in 2 years, 3 years, then it might not make sense to buy a new home, because remember, when you buy this new home, you've got moving costs, you've got the cost to potentially furnish the new place with furniture, maybe you have to buy pictures on the wall. So there's always costs of moving. Obviously, it's a hassle as well, but you're going to have that hassle regardless of whether you buy a home or rent. But then you have to turn around and sell it. And when you sell the home, you obviously have to pay the commission to sell the home to the realtor, and the closing costs for the mortgage. So you have to keep in mind when you buy a new home, in other words, that the home has to grow, let's just say at least, we'll say 7 to 9% at a bare minimum, in order for you to turn around and sell that home in the future and break even. So you have to, in my opinion, I think you want to plan on being in this new home if you move at least a few years. We'll say, I don't want to put a number on it because I don't want to get called out here, but if the market's booming and doing really well and it continues to do so, then being in the house for 3-5 years probably would be fine. But we can't predict the future, nor do we have any clue what the real estate market's going to do in the next 5 years. So on the other hand, if the market starts to crash at some point in the next 3, 4, 5 years, then you could find yourself in a situation where the house is actually worth less than what you paid for it. And as a result, you not only have to try and make up for the loss of the value of the home, but you also have to, again, sell the home for a total cost of anywhere between, we'll call it 7 and 9% for the cost of selling the home, the closing costs and realtor fees. Now, obviously, you can always sell a house on your own if you have that kind of time on your hands. I don't do that. It's not I wouldn't sell my house on my own because I don't have that kind of time, but to each her or his own. But you're always going to have some cost to sell a home, so you got to keep break even in mind. Now, the other things to keep in mind is, are there potential upcoming changes in your life? Like, for instance, if you're thinking about moving today, are you going to be empty nesters in the not too distant future, and would you consider moving a second time? And if that's the case, again, if you move too soon, you could find yourself in a situation where you actually lose money on selling the house a second time. If you move out of state, maybe you're saying, you know what, I'm thinking of moving right now, but I might be moving out of state to another place, Florida, Arizona, someplace warmer here in the next few years. Again, that's another situation where you got to keep the future in mind when you're making these decisions, because real estate is not like buying or selling a stock, where if you buy a stock tomorrow and you want to sell it next week, you can just sell it. Obviously, if you buy real estate, and you want to sell it next week, well, obviously nobody would do that, but let's just say you buy real estate today and you want to sell it in 2 years, you have to sell it, obviously, after commissions to someone else who's willing to pay more than what you paid for it. Again, net after commissions. So Another thing to keep in mind is divorce. If you're thinking about right now going through a divorce perhaps, or unfortunately then maybe that's on the horizon, it might make a lot of sense to sell your home right now and potentially rent instead of buying, because the real estate market is doing so well, and there are so many buyers out there that you might get a nice profit on your home. You could rent something while the dust settles until you find something in the future, potentially even at lower prices should the real estate market start to struggle at some point in the future. Some other things to keep in mind, questions to ask yourself. Again, what would you need to spend to upgrade, renovate, or furnish your new home if you were to purchase? These costs need to be kept in mind whenever you're buying a home. And then, again, what's your break even? If you buy this home, what's going to be your cost to not only purchase it, in terms of moving costs and all the stuff you're going to buy, and then what's your cost going to be to sell it, and then therefore how much does my home need to grow between now and when I might sell it to make sure I break even, or better yet, obviously profit. And again, another thing we have to keep in mind here is we have no idea what the real estate market is. We can't control that, just like we can't control many things like the current economic conditions we're living in right now. And I guess this is why I say that it might make sense to, if I own a home and I'm looking to buy something but for a short period of time, why it might make a lot of sense to rent for the short term is because we've got millions of people unemployed. If the current economic conditions aren't good but people are buying homes, then why not sell to them? And then why not wait for things to settle down and then buy something later? Now, is it entirely possible that the market could go up and we could see higher real estate prices in 2 years from now? Absolutely. But we're trying to stack the odds in our favor here, and we're trying to make calculated, intelligent financial decisions. And I don't think it would make a whole lot of sense to buy a home, let's just say, in today's real estate market, and that I plan on selling next year or 2 years from now or even 3 years from now, when I have no idea what's going to happen with unemployment, whether or not people are going to be able to afford to make their home payments, whether or not more people are going to become unemployed, and how that's going to affect the supply and demand equation in the real estate market. And then another thing to keep in mind is property tax, or the cost of home ownership. When you rent, obviously you don't have to pay property tax. Second of all, when you rent, you don't have to worry about repairing anything at your home. Somebody else takes care of that for you. And then another thing also to keep in mind is when you rent and you're ready to buy, you don't have to sell your house. I think that people kind of discount that benefit that, if I'm selling my house today and I want to move someplace for a couple years, but I really don't know how long I'll be there, but it won't be for long, I can sell my house today, make a profit, go someplace where I can rent. I don't have to worry about property tax. I don't have to worry about the cost of home ownership or repairs. And then when I'm ready to buy, I just move out. I don't have to sell my house. I don't have to worry about paying 2 mortgages. It's very, very simple and stress-free. Well, I shouldn't say stress-free, of course. You have to buy the new home, right? But think about whether or not if you're going to experience a change in income at some point in the near future, that might change this answer. So if I'm getting close to retirement and I'm looking to buy a home, whenever you buy a home, obviously they look at your financials. And if all of a sudden you have such little income on paper because you're retired, let's just say, or if you're going to be losing your job, let's just say, and you want to move a home. I don't know that you want to go buy a new home when you're losing your job, but just keep in mind that if your income's going to change, especially if it's going down or it's being eliminated because you're retiring, then you have to keep that in mind when determining whether or not you want to buy or sell a home, just buy a new home. So at the end of the day, if I'm a homeowner, determining whether or not I should buy or rent, I think the verdict here is it depends on a lot of things, unfortunately. And I think everyone is different. Everybody's circumstances are different. Again, interest rates are at historic lows. People are leaving congested areas like apartments, places downtown, and moving out into the suburbs and looking for places that are their own, with their own space, their own yards, for safety reasons, because we're living in a pandemic. The supply-demand relationship in the real estate market right now is very favorable for sellers. And again, something to keep in mind as well is the more expensive the home, the smaller the pool of buyers. And this is important for people who are moving up market. One of the questions we hear a lot is, or the comments I'll hear a lot, not really questions, is somebody say, well, I own my home and I want to buy a new home, but if I sell it, I'll have to pay high prices for a new home because because the real estate market's doing so well. And it's like, well, yeah, but if you sell your home now, you're selling at a high, And so you'd be buying at a high, so it's kind of a wash. And the same goes for the inverse. Let's just say if the real estate market's not doing well, in times in the last couple decades when, talking to clients about selling their real estate, selling a home and buying a new home when the real estate market's down, they'll say, well, I don't want to lose money on my home. The real estate market's down. I don't want to sell. But then you'd be buying low as well, right? There's only, I think, one big exception to that rule. So I think, first of all, if the market's down, you're selling low and you're buying low, so who cares? If the market's high, you're selling high and you're buying high, so who cares? The caveat, or the one exception I think that is important to understand, is that the bigger the home that you buy, the smaller the pool of buyers, like I said earlier. And the reason why that's important is because it's all supply and demand. If you have a home that you're buying or selling, let's say selling a home in the 250, 300, 350 range, there's plenty of buyers that can afford to buy a home in that range. But if you're trying to buy a home that you might want to sell in the future at, $500, $600, $700, $800,000 or more, $1 million and up, there are much fewer people who can afford a home like that, even if there are two working parties in the family, like two people, two different parties working all full-time jobs. Even then, there's not that many people who can afford those kinds of homes. So when the market goes down, those larger homes get hurt a little bit harder, or hit a little bit harder, I should say, than the smaller homes, which can be turned over a lot faster because, again, there's just more people available who can afford to purchase the smaller, less expensive homes. So bottom line, in conclusion here, I know I said a lot, and I apologize. I rambled a little bit today as well. But again, the bottom line is the market is booming right now, and for several reasons that I mentioned. The real estate cycle is roughly 18 years. Now, this doesn't mean that exactly on the day after 17 years and 364 days that the market crashes. It doesn't work that way. So there's no promises here. But the end of this real estate market cycle would take place sometime in the mid to late 2020s, and it's going to be 2021 here in a few months. So again, no promises. And obviously, we're living in a pandemic, so who knows how that's going to affect the real estate market. Obviously, the economy's been affected. We don't know to what extent yet, but short term, the economy is in shambles. Millions of people are unemployed, so I think we want to keep that in mind when we look at whether or not we want to sell our home, what we want to buy, how long we're going to stay there, and whether it might make sense to rent instead. So with that being said, in closing, I think one of the biggest lessons I want to share today is that if you do want to buy a home, I think you want to plan on spending at least 5 to 7 years, to be conservative, in that next home before you move again, in order to make up for the break even that would need to take place in order to sell that home for at least what you paid for it, net after costs, and then buy a new home or rent or whatever you would do thereafter. So thank you so much. That's it for today's show. You can feel free to share this episode with your friends and family. If you'd like to discuss your personal situation further, remember you never have to be a client to ask a question. If you'd like to set up an introduction call or a Zoom meeting, just head over to our website to schedule something in our calendar. As I always say, there are thousands and thousands of podcasts out there. You chose to give ours a listen today, so thank you so much for tuning in. Be sure to subscribe on iTunes and YouTube, and remember, you can sign up at libertaswealth.com to get these updates, as well as all our other content, including screencast videos and articles delivered directly to your email inbox without having to check in. Feel free to follow us on Facebook as well. I'm also on Twitter, as I mentioned earlier, at Adam Koós, as well as Instagram at Financial Surgeon. Thank you once again for joining us, and we will see you next time.
Thank you for listening to the Cash Podcast with your financial surgeon, Adam Koós. To see any charts or images that were mentioned in this show, or to check out additional articles, videos, and other educational resources, head over to libertaswealth.com.